Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I have been debating in my own mind and with everyone that loves me for months whether or not to come forward with this information. Clive Davis, Puff Daddy's mentor, who supposedly taught Puff Daddy everything he knows about how to control, abuse, and manipulate people. Clive Davis is friends with my biological uncle. He was friends with my uncle for years. He used to come into my uncle's restaurant all the time. Now, my uncle, the chef, and Clive Davis are both bisexual. So I would not be surprised if these two psychos were ever, at any point, more than friends. My ex-uncle, who, for the sake of this video, we're just gonna call the chef. I wanted to publicly name him, but people who love me are terrified of me publicly naming him. So, if after releasing this video, if I get hit with a cease and desist from an attorney or any legal action whatsoever is taken against me, if I feel like someone is following me home and I get scared, if anything happens to me or anyone that I love, if one hair stands up on the back of my neck, ex-uncle dear, I will release your name, the town you live in, the restaurant you used to own, and the restaurant you currently own, and the towns they are in. So fast, you will be doxxed so fast, your head will spin. If anything bad happens to me, my ex-uncle, the chef, the psychopath who owns the restaurant, and or Clive Davis, they're the ones who did it. I have news articles that I found of Clive Davis describing his favorite restaurant. My uncle's restaurant is listed in this article. I have another news article about my uncle's restaurant that lists Clive Davis as a frequent guest. And if just in case any of these articles are taken off the internet, I have thoroughly copied and documented them. I have old family videos of myself at this restaurant, at my ex-uncle's restaurant with my other family members, so I have the proof to back up that I am who I say I am. So I met Clive Davis a couple of times when I was a teenager. He would come into my uncle's restaurant and it was just like, he would come in and he was treated like a king. I mean, everybody would like murmur about Whitney Houston. He would walk into the room and he would like walk through the restaurant and her name would just constantly be murmured by everyone that like Clive Davis passed. Or everyone that saw Clive Davis was like, oh, Whitney Houston. Oh, that's the head of Whitney Houston's record label. Oh my God, he knows Whitney Houston. He manages Whitney Houston. It was like constant. He would talk about her like she was a trophy, okay? My mom got a friendship with Clive Davis that was tight enough for her to be invited to Clive Davis's daughter's wedding. And she came home gushing about the Vera Wang wedding dress. Let's talk about the kind of friends that Clive Davis keeps. I want to talk about my child molesting psychopath pedophile uncle that was friends with Clive Davis for years. Okay, for the sake of this video, I'm just going to call him the chef. The chef had two sons. And here's a picture of me and my two cousins, and I'm covering their identity to protect them. The oldest dark-haired boy and the younger boy with the light hair, okay? These boys were exposed to pornography from the time they were born. The youngest son, my earliest memory of meeting him was him telling me all the places he should stick his 6-year-old penis in my body when we were both 6 years old, because these boys were exposed to intense hardcore pornography their whole lives. Okay, even before I was born, the chef, their father, my uncle, the chef kicked my aunt's pregnant cat in the stomach and she miscarried all of her kittens. He made, like, I think my older brother, this is before I was born, my older brother and my older cousin sleep in a room in the winter with no insulation, with very thin blankets. When I was 9 years old, the chef came over to take a shower because supposedly there was something wrong with the plumbing in his house, but it was a lie. It was just an excuse to show me his penis. He got naked to take the shower, walked into the kitchen where I was with my mother, and just hung out for like a few minutes talking to us totally naked. You know, my mother, when it happened, said, oh, he's just very liberal. And then years later, I was talking to a girl in a support group I was in, and she said, oh, that's grooming. He was trying to molest you. That's grooming. He was trying to make it so come over and I'll show it to you, and then the next time I come over, I'll have you touch it. And then like they're trying to normalize the sexual abuse. So again, this is Clive Davis's BFF. Another time that I remember all these like sexual disgusting things. I remember I was hanging out at my uncle's restaurant because my mom worked there like a slave for him for years. And the only time I could see my mother was to go over there and wait for her to finish up work. So I'm sitting in the dining room. The restaurant is closed. They have not opened for dinner yet. My uncle comes over and tells me that there's this imaginary hole in the wall from the dining room into the woman's bathroom, and he can look into the wall and look at all the women in there with their pants down or their skirts up going to the bathroom. How most kids were described these magical situations, like Santa can come through the keyhole, my uncle was describing these unrealistic situations where he was like a sexual predator with ultimate power, is how he liked to describe these imaginary situations to a 9-year-old girl. When I was 10 or 11, I remember my cousins were all hanging out together. It was me and the 2 boys, and the youngest son here started acting out a rape scene in the room with us. We were trying to watch TV, and there was like a futon or a bed behind us, and he started acting out the scene where he was raping somebody. When me and my best friend, whose mother also worked for my uncle, were about 11, 12 years old, our bodies were criticized in front of every man that worked at my uncle's restaurant for not looking like Playboy playmates at 11 years old. How dare we have not gone through puberty yet and look like this? And they'd hold up, this image of like this Playboy playmate. My uncle, oh my God, the Playboys all over the house, everywhere. So grown men would come over to his house that worked for him for his mandatory boring ass parties. And our bodies were criticized for not looking like this at 11, 12 years old. For not looking like the airbrushed Playboy playmate in the centerfold of the Playboy at 11. This was all like so ignored by the adults. All these weird behaviors. Nobody paid any attention to it. All the adults like enabled and excused it. The oldest son, when he was 18 years old, said that if he had a daughter, he would have sex with her. And he said this to his girlfriend at the time, who was also another one of my friends. Another one of my closest friends. And she told me what he said because she was horrified because this was her boyfriend. And we both confronted him, and he was like, what? What's the big deal? So I would have sex with my own daughter. People are people. What's the big deal? Thank God he never had any kids. I had all of the traits of a child who was molested at 2 or 3 years old. Every single one. I had every single psychological trait of a child who was molested at that age. I already shot a video all about that, so you can click and check that horrible thing out if you're more curious about that, or if you feel like maybe you also were maybe molested before you were old enough to make memories. So this is the environment the 3 of us grew up in, and other kids in my family grew up in. There was also times after puberty, the youngest son who ended up doing so many drugs, can't imagine why he would need to self-medicate every day of his life, would look at me and flirt with me and say sexual things just like he had when he was 6 years old. He would stare at me in ways where I felt like I was being checked out by my own cousin, and he would say these sexually inappropriate things to me because he was raised and his brother were raised to believe that people were put on this planet to be used and discarded, and especially women. And it did not matter if you were related to somebody or not. It was just somebody you could use for your own gratification. So given what his brother said about how he would have sex with his daughter, and both of these boys had these crazy views when it came to incest, I would not be surprised if when I was 2, 3 years old, when I was molested, if the chef made the 3 of us act out sexual situations with each other. All the adults who worked for my uncle saw the pornography on a 9-year-old boy's wall. They heard all of the constant sexual inappropriate talk. My uncle loved to expose children to pornography and horrible, awful sexual situations. And this was all stuff that was happening in front of all his employees. So just imagine what was happening behind closed doors when no one was looking. The chef, my uncle, would also go into these he would have these like rageful, ridiculous moments where he would just like fly off the handle, and the verbal abuse, he would just like scream at people. He hit my mother in the face. He abused all the waitresses who worked for him, all the people who worked for him, especially the women, because he was such a chauvinistic pig. But yeah, another young girl that worked for him, he bruised her face. He like grabbed her face and squeezed it one day when he got mad at her when he was in one of his rages. Absolute psychopath. My uncle is a child molester, pedophile, woman beating psychopath. Friends with Clive Davis for years. So once when I was 16 years old, I remember my mom brought me to Clive Davis's house. I remember this big, ugly Lego house. And I walked in and there was him and his entourage there. And I was bored and I decided to start walking around and exploring the house. And given what we now know about this man, this young teenage girl walking around his house was not a good idea. Now, nothing bad happened to me while I was over there. All the sexual abuse and mistreatment I experienced was from my own family. Lucky me. But I'm just saying this to prove that I was there and I saw this stuff. So I remember he had this spiral staircase in his house that led up to this walkway that wrapped around his living room, and then there was another set of stairs going down. And this led up to this area where there was a couch. Ample, vast amount of square footage space. And I just remember the guy giving me the creeps. I remember he gave me a hug when I left and I was just like, ugh. But my mom had a history of worshiping toxic men. Her own father was toxic, her brother was toxic, Clive Davis was toxic, and the cult that she joined after she, got fired by my uncle, another story entirely, another toxic man. So she had this history of holding up these men who were horrible and worshiping them. It was disgusting. So is it a total coincidence that Clive Davis, who allegedly taught Puff Daddy everything that he knows about how to control, abuse, manipulate people, abuse people, use people for his own disgusting sexual freak-offs, and the fact that Puff Daddy got away with this for years. Clive Davis supposedly taught him how to do that. Is it a coincidence that Clive Davis is friends with my uncle, who is also a psychopath, child molester, and now supposedly underage kids were involved in this sex trafficking? Is this a total coincidence? I highly doubt it. I'm very curious to see who's on all the tapes. I'm very curious to hear all the names of people who are on these sex tapes that have been uncovered. If my uncle shows up on one of the sex tapes that was uncovered, I would not be even slightly surprised. I would be more surprised if he wasn't involved in any of the sex crimes. If by some chance my uncle was not involved in any of the assaults that happened to people, any of the abuse, any of the sex trafficking, any of the manipulation, if he wasn't involved, then I guess he just wasn't cool enough to commit crimes with the big boys. Maybe he was just the little bitch who brought Clive Davis his food. Thank you to Jaguar Wright and everyone else who knows Clive Davis, who has spoken out against Clive Davis. I, like so many other Whitney Houston fans, would like to know why he had a Grammy party in the hotel that she died, the night that she died. So disrespectful. So disrespectful. People have rumors that he murdered Whitney Houston, that he murdered Phyllis Hyman. This is why people who love me were terrified and did not want me to say anything about this online. So, if anything bad happens to me, my ex-uncle, the chef, the psychopath who owns the restaurant, and or Clive Davis, they're the ones who did it. My heart goes out to anyone who was involved in this, to anyone who got tangled up in Clive Davis's or Puff Daddy's disgusting web of abuse. Thanks for listening, guys. If I have any updates on anything, I promise I will share them with you.